Matthew, but I'm worried that we might not be compatible anymore. I think you're with the right person whenever you're in a relationship that makes you feel like you can fly. And that's not how I'm feeling right now. The honest truth is that
Greta loves Matthew, but she no longer thinks that she's in love with him. That's a problem. Like, she's been playing the role of loving fiancé whilst knowing deep.
It's over. Those two words hit harder than any scream. One moment, Matthew thought he was coming home to dinner. The next, he was watching his future dissolve across the table, fork still in hand. Greta didn't yell, she didn't run, she whispered. Quiet, steady, final, and that silence, it said everything she'd been hiding for months. Welcome back, I'm Maya Rose, and you're watching STARSCOOP US. If you love the raw, unfiltered truth behind the 90-day fiancé chaos, hit subscribe and drop your thoughts below. Because tonight, we're breaking down one of the most heartbreaking reveals this season. Greta ending a relationship that looked perfect until it suddenly wasn't. What makes this story hit different is how slow the ending came. There was no betrayal, no huge fight, no secret messages. Just two people living together, smiling for the cameras, and quietly losing touch with each other's hearts. Greta's words, "I don't think I love you anymore," weren't a sudden shock. They were the echo of something that had been fading long before she said it out loud. At first glance, Greta and Matthew had what every 90-day couple wants. A clean immigration journey, a cozy house, two families ready to blend. No explosive drama, no major red flags, but maybe that's the problem. They mistook peace for passion. He thought stability meant safety. She thought comfort meant connection. And when she realized she didn't feel alive next to him anymore, she didn't run. She acted. She cooked. She smiled. She performed the version of love she thought she owed him. The saddest part is that he believed it. Every meal she made, every soft kiss, every promise about their future, it all looked real. And in his mind, that meant they were fine. But when someone stops talking about how they feel, you can still feel the distance in the room. The laughter sounds lighter. The hugs linger too long, like both people are waiting for something that isn't coming back. Matthew had no idea his dream life was quietly collapsing. He was too focused on fixing what he could see, work stress, wedding plans, the talk about kids. But the cracks weren't in their plans, they were in their connection. Greta had been gone emotionally for half a year, smiling through guilt, trying to convince herself that love could be forced into staying. The moment she said those words, the entire illusion shattered. You could see it in his eyes. Confusion first, then denial, then a kind of quiet disbelief that makes the air heavy. He didn't ask why, he already knew. Somewhere deep down, he'd felt her pulling away. He'd chosen not to face it. Because facing it meant losing her. But what if the relationship had already ended long before that dinner table? What if Greta's silence wasn't coldness, but mercy? The kind where you keep pretending to spare someone else's pain, until it starts killing you instead. The truth behind this breakup isn't about who stopped loving first. It's about how easy it is to keep playing happy when you're terrified of being the one to break the dream. And tonight, we're going to rewind everything, piece by piece, to see how two people who once felt unstoppable ended up standing in the ruins of their own promises. Because before Greta said it was over, she'd already left in every way that mattered. And the question is, how long had she been planning her escape while Matthew was still planning their wedding? To anyone watching from the outside, Greta and Matthew were the definition of a fairy tale. The smiling photos, the matching sweaters, the countryside backdrops, it looked like something out of a Hallmark movie. Their engagement shoot went viral among the fanbase for how effortlessly sweet they seemed. She called him her calm after the storm. He called her his forever home. But what they never showed was how much effort it took to keep that picture perfect. Behind those filtered posts, there was a quiet tension neither of them wanted to admit. Every "I love you" started to sound rehearsed. Every photo felt like a scene they had to shoot again until it looked right. It wasn't fake, exactly. It was forced, the way people force smiles in a relationship they're scared to lose. When Greta first moved to the UK, she tried hard to believe she'd made the right choice. She told her family she was happy, that the adjustment was easy. But even in those first weeks, she found herself missing a version of herself she left behind. She'd traded ambition for stability, chaos for comfort. And comfort can start to feel like a cage when you don't belong in it. Matthew, for his part, thought he was doing everything right. He worked longer hours so she wouldn't have to stress about money. He planned weekend trips and romantic dinners. He was building what he thought was a life together. But Greta didn't need more plans. She needed to feel seen. And the harder he tried to make her happy, the more she felt trapped inside the image of a woman she didn't recognize anymore. Their friends described them as opposites that balanced each other. He was grounded, she was restless. But that same dynamic started to turn toxic in small ways. He found peace in predictability, she found it suffocating. He saw her silence as calm, she was screaming inside. And when she started withdrawing, less texting during the day, shorter hugs at night, he mistook it for stress, not disconnection. Their farm dates became metaphors for what was happening between them. On camera, it looked like romance, feeding animals, holding hands, laughing at the mud. Off camera, the silences stretched too long. She stared at her phone more than at him. He kept filling the quiet with small talk, trying to keep things light. But no matter how many jokes he made, he could feel her slipping. There was one clip fans loved. Greta feeding apples to a pig, giggling as it snapped too close and nicked her finger. The audience thought it was adorable, but Greta later told a friend that it hurt, a lot more than she let on. She covered it up, laughed for the cameras, and played along. That's what she did best. Hide the pain, smile through it, pretend everything was fine. That's when the cracks started to show in the smallest moments. She flinched when he called her babe. He stopped noticing. She went to bed early. He stayed downstairs watching TV alone. When he asked if she was okay, she said she was tired. And maybe she was tired of pretending, tired of being the good partner everyone admired. Still, she kept performing. The perfect fiancé, cooking dinner, posting throwbacks, writing captions about gratitude. Meanwhile, Matthew scrolled through comments about how lucky he was to have her, not realizing how fragile his luck had become. They were both trapped, she in guilt, he in denial, and neither wanted to say it out loud. That's the quiet danger of a perfect relationship. You get addicted to how it looks, even when it stops feeling good. Greta didn't want to disappoint him. Matthew didn't want to see the truth. Together, they built a beautiful illusion and called it love. The more flawless it looked, the emptier it became. And what started as a dream life in the English countryside was slowly becoming a silent performance where both of them forgot how to be real. The moment everything started to unravel came wrapped in something small, a conversation about kids. They were sitting on a wooden bench under a gray English sky, half-eaten apples in their hands, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful until it isn't. Greta looked at Matthew and said she wasn't sure she wanted children anymore. For a second, he didn't even react. He smiled, thought she was joking. Then his face changed. The kind of change you only see when someone's dream vanishes mid-sentence. He went still, searching her eyes for a reason, maybe hoping to find a hint that she didn't mean it. But she meant every word. To the outside world, that might have seemed like a small disagreement. Couples fight over that all the time. But this wasn't about babies or timing. This was about truth finally forcing its way out of a cage. Greta had been sitting on doubts for months, packaging them neatly behind polite smiles. That one sentence, "I'm not sure I want kids," was the first crack in the mask. Matthew tried to be calm. He asked if something had changed, if she was scared, if it was just stress. He was desperate to understand because in his mind, love could fix anything. He said he'd give up kids if it meant keeping her. His words were full of sincerity, but they also exposed the imbalance between them. He was still dreaming of forever, and she was already planning how to survive the next day. She nodded, thanked him, told him she appreciated how understanding he was. But inside, she felt worse. Because the more kind he became, the more trapped she felt. Every compromise he offered made her guilt heavier. He wasn't trying to manipulate her, he was trying to hold the pieces together. And that made her silence feel cruel. That's what people miss about these moments on reality TV. The drama isn't always shouting or betrayal. Sometimes it's this, a quiet, aching scene where love tries to save something that's already gone. Greta didn't break down or argue, she didn't even look angry. She looked tired, defeated. The kind of tired that comes from pretending to feel what you don't. Matthew, meanwhile, still believed he could fix it. He promised her time, patience, space. He told her she didn't have to decide now. That's how far his loyalty went. But the truth, Greta had already decided. She just couldn't say it yet. When she got home that night, she didn't feel relief. She felt haunted by how gentle he'd been, because kindness makes it harder to leave. It makes the guilt unbearable. She sat at the kitchen table, replaying his words, wondering how she could ever look him in the eye again and tell him there was more. The no kids talk wasn't the start of their breakup, It was the first time her truth slipped out. And once you start telling small truths, it gets harder to keep hiding the big ones. The next day, she woke up knowing something had to give. She couldn't keep confiding in everyone but him. But instead of choosing honesty, she reached for her phone and called someone else. Whatever she said on that call would decide what came next. And it wasn't Matthew on the other end of the line. The next morning, Greta's phone lit up before she even got out of bed. She scrolled past unread messages from Matthew and opened FaceTime instead. Not to call him, but her old friend Hannah back in the States. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional refuge. Hannah was her safe place, the one person who wouldn't make her feel guilty for what she was about to admit. When Hannah's face appeared on screen, the conversation started light. Compliments, small talk, laughter. But it took less than a minute for the tone to change. Hannah noticed the bandage on Greta's finger, the result of that adorable pig bite from the farm date fans had loved. Greta laughed it off, said she was fine, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Because that bite, that tiny wound, had started to feel symbolic. Pain covered by laughter. Hurt brushed aside for the sake of appearance. As they talked, Greta's words began to slip. She told Hannah how strange it felt to be living the life she'd once wanted and feeling nothing. She confessed she'd dropped the no kids bomb and that Matthew had responded with pure kindness. Instead of comforting her, it broke her heart. He was being too good, too patient, too loving, and that made it impossible for her to keep pretending. Hannah didn't interrupt, she just listened. Because what Greta was describing wasn't confusion, it was emotional exhaustion. She admitted she hadn't felt connected to Matthew for months. That sometimes when he'd hug her, she'd feel herself freeze, smiling through panic, afraid he'd feel how distant she'd become. She didn't cry as she said it. She sounded calm, detached, like she was narrating someone else's story. What she didn't realize was how far she'd drifted into emotional infidelity. Not in a romantic way, but in where she put her honesty. The person hearing her fears wasn't her fiancé, it was someone who couldn't be hurt by them. That's the danger of unloading your heart to someone who doesn't have to live with the fallout. It gives you relief but no resolution. Matthew was still at work, probably thinking she was fine. He had no idea his fiancée was breaking down miles away, confessing to another person the truths he deserved to hear. The irony is, Greta believed she was protecting him. She told herself she'd wait until the right time to talk, but there's never a right time to tell someone you don't love them anymore. Waiting only multiplies the damage. By the end of the call, Hannah's tone had shifted. She wasn't gentle anymore. She told Greta she couldn't keep doing this, playing perfect, cooking dinners, acting engaged while her heart had already left the room. You can't marry someone because it's fine, she said. You deserve real. Greta nodded, but her face said everything. She already knew. She was staying out of guilt, not love. When the call ended, she sat there staring at her phone. The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument could. For the first time, she admitted it to herself, even if only in her head. She was done. The love she'd once felt wasn't coming back, no matter how much she tried to perform it. That phone call wasn't about advice, it was rehearsal. Practice for the truth she'd eventually have to say out loud. And when she hung up, she knew exactly what she needed to do next. The question wasn't if she'd tell Matthew, it was when. Matthew believed that love meant patience. He grew up watching couples fight and break apart over things that could have been solved with empathy, so when Greta said she wasn't sure about having kids, his instinct wasn't fear. It was understanding. He wanted her to feel safe, to know he wouldn't pressure her into a life she wasn't ready for. He told her that he would still choose her, even if it meant never becoming a father. His voice cracked when he said it, but he meant it. Greta tried to smile, nodding as if relieved, but inside she was drowning in guilt. Because every time he showed more kindness, her silence felt heavier. She wasn't protecting him anymore. She was hurting him by letting him believe there was still something to save. To Matthew, that conversation was proof of how strong their relationship was. He thought they were moving through a rough patch, that love was about compromise. What he didn't see was that compromise only works when both people are still fighting for the same thing. Greta had already stopped fighting. She was in survival mode, saying what she needed to say to keep things calm. He spent the next few days trying to make her happy in every way he could. He bought her flowers, cooked her breakfast, even canceled plans with friends to spend more time together. Each gesture came from a place of love, but it also came from fear. He could feel the distance between them and was trying to fill it with effort. He thought effort could rebuild connection. But love doesn't work like that when one person has already checked out. The more he gave, the more it exposed how one-sided their bond had become. He was offering loyalty, devotion, stability. She was offering politeness. He'd talk about their future, and she'd answer with maybe or we'll see. He didn't notice the pattern at first. He took it as stress or homesickness or maybe nerves about marriage. It never crossed his mind that she was already halfway gone. There's something painful about watching someone love this blindly. Matthew wasn't naive, he was hopeful. He believed that love could fix anything if you wanted it badly enough. That's why when Greta said she needed space, he gave it to her. When she said she was confused, he told her he'd wait. He believed he was doing the right thing, that true love meant sacrifice. But what he didn't realize was that every time he put her needs above his own truth, he was teaching her that she didn't have to be honest. He told a friend once, half joking, that he'd give up fatherhood if it meant growing old with Greta. It sounded romantic, noble even. But that's where love gets dangerous. When your identity becomes wrapped around another person's comfort, you stop seeing yourself as part of the story. His love wasn't strength anymore. It was erasure. Greta saw this and couldn't stand it. She'd catch him looking at her like she was his whole world, and the guilt would twist in her stomach. How could she leave someone who would give up everything for her? How could she tell him that his sacrifice didn't make her feel loved, it made her feel trapped? That's the cruel paradox of one-sided devotion. The more he proved he'd never leave, the more she wanted to run. In public, they still looked solid. The kind of couple that made other people sigh with envy. He'd hold doors open, carry her bag, pull her clothes for photos. But every gesture was a patch over a hole. The cracks were spreading faster than either of them could fix. And because he refused to see it, she started resenting him for that too. Not because he was cruel, but because he was kind in a way that made her dishonesty unbearable. There's a moment from their footage that still sticks with fans, Matthew looking right into the camera and saying he'd always stand by her, no matter what. His voice was steady, his eyes sincere. But when you rewatch it now, you can see it. That quiet desperation of someone loving harder than they should, hoping it'll be enough to hold a crumbling foundation. Greta didn't plan to hurt him. She kept trying to convince herself that maybe his goodness could change how she felt. That maybe gratitude could grow into love again. But love doesn't come back out of obligation. You can't force it through guilt. The more she stayed, the more dishonest it felt. And the closer Matthew got, the more suffocating her kindness became. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from betrayal, but from realization. When you finally understand that the person you love has already let go emotionally, but is still there physically, smiling through the goodbye. That's what Matthew was living without knowing it. Every morning kiss, every dinner conversation, it was all a slow, polite ending. When Greta saw how far he was willing to bend, she knew she had to break it. Because the longer she let him love her like that, the crueler it became. He wasn't loving her anymore. He was loving the memory of who she used to be. And every act of devotion was another layer of denial, one she didn't have the strength to peel away gently. Love that asks you to erase yourself isn't noble, it's slow destruction. The question is whether Matthew's loyalty was strength or self-sacrifice, and whether Greta's silence was mercy or fear. Either way, their story was already over. They were just the last to admit it. Their days began to blur together. Same breakfast, same small talk, same quiet dinners where the only sound was cutlery and the soft hum of a TV they weren't watching. What once felt like cozy domestic life started feeling like a rehearsal for something that would never premiere. Greta cooked, Matthew cleaned, they smiled at the right times, but it was muscle memory, not love. He'd come home from work, hang his coat, kiss her on the cheek, and ask how her day went. She'd say fine, always fine. That word became their entire emotional vocabulary. He thought it meant stability, she knew it meant surrender. And she hated herself for it, because every fine was another lie, a small betrayal dressed as peace. The routine grew heavier. They still went on walks, but the conversations felt hollow. He'd point out the beauty of the sunset, she'd nod without seeing it. He'd crack a joke to lighten the mood, and she'd laugh half a second too late. It wasn't that she wanted to be cruel, she was trying to keep him safe from the truth. But there's no safety in pretending. What the cameras caught looked harmless enough. Two people learning to coexist. No screaming, no chaos, no grand betrayal. But the absence of conflict became its own kind of violence. Every day that passed without honesty was another day of quiet decay. Greta started feeling invisible inside her own life. She'd lie awake at night watching him sleep, wondering if he ever noticed that she'd stopped touching him first. Wondering if he ever felt the silence she was drowning in. But Matthew was used to mistaking calm for closeness. He thought her distance was comfort, that her quiet meant contentment. He didn't realize he was living with a ghost version of the woman he loved. Even their affection became scripted. When they hugged, she'd keep her eyes open. When he said he loved her, she'd answer with a soft, "me too," because it was easier than saying nothing. The tragedy wasn't that she stopped loving him, it's that she kept pretending to, out of guilt, out of duty, out of the unbearable fear of being the villain in a story where he'd done everything right. Greta tried to reignite something. She planned dinners, put on the same perfume she wore when they first met, forced smiles during game nights. But the harder she tried, the emptier it felt. Love can't survive on nostalgia alone. You can't fake chemistry any more than you can fake breath. One evening, she caught her reflection while setting the table and froze. The woman staring back looked polite, polished, lifeless. Not the girl who once believed she'd met her soulmate. Not the girl who used to laugh too loud or dance barefoot in the kitchen. She'd become someone else entirely, a version built to make Matthew comfortable. That realization hit harder than any argument ever could. Matthew noticed something off that night but said nothing. He assumed she was tired. He offered to clean up, to give her space. He thought space would help. But the more space he gave, the further she drifted. Silence became their new language. And in that silence, Greta's guilt grew louder. Days later, she caught herself scrolling through old photos of them. The early ones, when her eyes lit up just from being near him. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was mourning. She wasn't missing him. She was missing the version of herself that used to love him. That's when she realized she couldn't keep living like this. Every small act of kindness from him now felt like a reminder of the lie she was maintaining. Sometimes love doesn't die in explosions, it dies quietly, in routines, in politeness, in silence. And by the time you notice, it's already gone. She began pulling away in ways too subtle to notice at first. She'd stay longer at the store, take solo walks, say she needed to clear her head. He took it as stress. He thought giving her space was respect. He didn't see it as the beginning of the end. But Greta knew. She could feel the mask slipping, and once it started, she couldn't hold it up again. She cried one night while folding laundry, tears falling over shirts that still smelled like him. Not from anger or heartbreak, but from exhaustion. Pretending to be in love had become her full-time job, and she was failing at it. The guilt was eating her alive. When Matthew asked what was wrong, she shook her head and said nothing. She didn't have the strength to start the storm that honesty would bring. But that silence said more than words ever could. He reached out to touch her hand, and she flinched without meaning to. That moment hung in the air, thick with truth neither of them could name. Greta knew then that her performance was over. You can't fake tenderness forever. Sooner or later, the eyes give you away. The next day, she decided to make him dinner, his favorite meal. Not to fix things, but to prepare for what came next. Because once you've lied with love long enough, the truth becomes the only kindness left to give. The night started like all the others. Matthew walked through the door, smiling, carrying the smell of rain and takeout he'd grabbed on the way home. Greta was already in the kitchen, stirring something she wasn't hungry for. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the room, but everything felt staged, like they were both playing characters in a movie that should have ended long ago. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, and told her he'd had a good day. She smiled back, but it was the kind of smile that hides panic. Her hands shook as she set the table, spoons clinking too loudly. Matthew didn't notice. He was talking about a new project at work, about how maybe next weekend they could visit his parents. She nodded along, eyes on her plate, counting her breaths. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. He kept asking small questions. How was your day? Did you get the email from your mom? Do you want to watch something later? And she kept answering like an echo. He was trying so hard to make it normal. She was trying even harder not to break. But the silence between words grew heavier, until it was the only thing left in the room. Matthew reached for her hand across the table, fingers brushing hers. That single touch cracked her composure. Her chest tightened, eyes stung. She wanted to pull away but couldn't move. He felt the tremor in her hand and looked up, finally seeing what he'd been pretending not to see for weeks. "Hey, what's wrong?" His voice was soft, steady, the kind that usually calmed her. But this time, it broke her completely. She looked at him and felt everything hit at once. The guilt, the exhaustion, the unbearable weight of pretending. Her throat burned. Tears came before she could stop them. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her mouth. All that came out was a shaky breath. Matthew's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, panic rising in his voice. He thought something was wrong, health, family, anything but this. He knelt beside her, asking again and again, "What happened? What's going on?" She shook her head, tears falling into her lap. She couldn't look at him, because looking meant telling the truth. He touched her arm, gentle, confused. "You're scaring me," he said. That sentence landed like a knife. Because he had no idea how close to the truth that was. She was about to shatter his world, and she didn't know how to do it kindly. Greta tried to breathe, to find her words, but her mind was chaos. Every memory flashed through her head. The first date, the airport reunion, the night he told her he wanted kids, the look on his face when she said she wasn't sure. Every moment of love felt like a blade now. She wanted to tell him she was sorry, but sorry wouldn't fix it. Sorry couldn't undo 6 months of silence. He reached for a napkin and wiped her tears with the same tenderness that once made her feel safe. That broke her even more. Because he was still trying to comfort her, even while she was about to destroy him. She whispered, "I don't know what's happening to me." It was the closest she'd come to the truth, but it wasn't the truth, not yet. Matthew nodded, squeezing her hand, saying they'd get through it, whatever it was. His eyes were full of love, of belief, of hope, and all she could think was how cruel it was to let him keep believing. The food went cold. The candles flickered out. They sat there in the dim light, two people side by side, miles apart. Greta's tears slowed, but the silence didn't lift. She felt hollow, like she'd already left the room. Matthew was still talking, whispering reassurances, trying to keep her tethered. He didn't understand that this was the moment she'd stopped fighting. At one point, she excused herself to the bathroom. She locked the door and stared at her reflection, eyes swollen, mascara streaked. She whispered to herself that she couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep being half of a lie. When she came back, Matthew had cleared the table, washed the dishes, and was sitting on the couch, waiting for her. He smiled softly and patted the seat next to him. She sat down, still trembling. The TV was on but muted, casting flickering light over both of them. He said, "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." That word, "we," was unbearable now, because there was no "we" left. Just a man who loved too much and a woman who couldn't love back. Greta took a deep breath, opened her mouth to speak, and stopped. The words were right there, heavy and hot on her tongue. Her heart was pounding so loud she could barely hear him anymore. She looked at his face, kind, open, trusting, and broke inside. She couldn't say it yet, not tonight, but her silence said everything. The truth was ready to come out. It was sitting between them, waiting for breath. And once she let it out, nothing would ever be the same again. Morning light slid through the curtains, soft and cold. Greta hadn't slept. She lay still beside Matthew, listening to the rhythm of his breathing and feeling the guilt press harder with each exhale. Every minute of silence felt like theft. She was stealing his time, his hope, his sense of safety, and she knew she couldn't do it one more day. When he stirred, she pretended to be asleep. It was easier that way. He kissed her forehead before leaving for work, whispering, "Love you." The words used to warm her. Now they made her stomach turn. The moment the door shut, she broke. She sat up in bed, shaking, tears already spilling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was the grief of knowing you're about to destroy someone who doesn't deserve it. She went through the motions that day like a ghost. She cleaned, folded laundry, cooked his favorite meal again. Every act was a silent apology. She wanted the evening to feel gentle, not like a fight. She wanted him to remember her as kind, even in the moment she shattered him. When he came home that night, he looked tired but calm. He smiled when he saw the table set, the candles lit, the food waiting. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She smiled back faintly, answering, "I wanted to." That was true in its own twisted way. She wanted to end this with care. Dinner began quietly. Forks clinked, glasses touched. He talked about work, about plans for the weekend, about maybe booking a small trip to the coast. Greta nodded, murmured agreement, but her mind was elsewhere. Her heart was racing. Every word he said felt like a goodbye she hadn't said yet. Halfway through the meal, he reached across the table. "You seem better tonight," he said softly. "I've missed this." That broke her composure. She set her fork down, hands trembling. "Matthew," she said, voice shaking. He stopped mid-bite. "I need to tell you something." He froze, eyes searching hers. She looked away. The clock ticked louder. Her throat tightened. "You're one of the best people I've ever known," she said, voice cracking. "You deserve everything good in the world." He smiled, confused. "Greta, what's this about?" Her lips quivered. "I don't think I'm being fair to you." The air shifted. He straightened, face tightening, but still calm. "What do you mean?" She looked down, tears blurring her vision. Every instinct told her to stop, to lie again, to buy more time. But she'd already done enough of that. Her next breath came out as a whisper. I don't think I love you anymore. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Matthew didn't move. His hand still hovered over the table. His eyes blinked once, then again, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. Greta couldn't meet his gaze. She covered her face, sobbing quietly. The sound filled the room like a confession to the universe. He stayed still for what felt like minutes. Then he leaned back, exhaling, as if someone had knocked the wind out of him. You don't love me? His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She nodded, unable to speak. He sat there, hands clasped, eyes unfocused. It was the look of someone who just lost the ground under them. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just stared at the table, breathing slowly, like he was waiting to wake up from a dream. I thought, he stopped himself. I thought we were just having a hard time. Greta wiped her eyes. I know, and I let you think that. I kept saying we were fine because I didn't know how to tell you. He nodded, still staring ahead. How long? The question hung heavy. She hesitated, then whispered, 6 months, maybe longer. That hit him like a slap. His eyes finally met hers, and the hurt there was worse than any anger could have been. You've known that long? I tried Matthew, she said, voice breaking. I kept hoping it would change. I didn't want to hurt you. He laughed under his breath, not from humor but disbelief. You didn't want to hurt me, but you've been lying to me for half a year? Greta winced. I was scared. Of what? Of me? No, she said softly. Of what this would do to you. He shook his head slowly, almost pitying. You should have given me the truth, not pity. That line cut her open, because he was right. All her care, her restraint, her effort to protect him, none of it mattered now. It had all turned into the very thing she wanted to avoid. He stood up and walked toward the window. His reflection stared back at him, pale and hollow. I gave up everything for you, he said quietly. I was ready to give up kids, my plans, all of it, because I thought that's what love was. Greta's hands clenched in her lap. And I'm sorry, she whispered. You didn't deserve this. You deserve someone who wants the same life as you. He turned, eyes red but calm. I wanted you, he said. That was the whole point. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear. She wanted to comfort him, but anything she said now would sound cruel. He didn't want her hand, her apology, or her reasoning. He wanted the version of her that no longer existed. They stood there in silence. Time slowed. The candles burned lower. The dinner table looked untouched, plates of food gone cold. Then, in a small, trembling voice, he asked, When did you stop loving me? She hesitated. I don't know. It wasn't one moment. It just faded. He nodded once, a quiet acceptance that hurt more than shouting ever could. Then I guess there's nothing left to say. Greta wanted him to yell, to break something, to make it easier to leave. But he didn't. He just sat back down, head in his hands, breathing through the wreckage. That silence felt like punishment. Minutes passed, neither moved. Then Matthew spoke again, voice calm but hollow. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. That line shattered her, because it wasn't bitterness, it was grace. The kind that only comes from someone who still loves you even after you've crushed them. She wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a sob. He didn't look up. He didn't reach for her. The space between them had become a wall neither could cross. That was the real ending, not the words, but the quiet that followed them. The kind of silence you can't come back from. And while Matthew sat still, processing the loss of a future he'd already built in his mind, Greta realized the hardest part wasn't saying goodbye. It was living with the fact that she'd already left months ago. Outside, the rain began again. Inside, two people sat in the ruins of what used to be love. Neither moved, neither spoke. The truth had finally been said, and there was no taking it back. But this story wasn't done. Because the next morning, when the news of their breakup started spreading among friends, the world that once envied them began to pick sides. And the fallout from that dinner table would prove that the end of love doesn't always stay private. It can echo far louder than anyone expects. When dawn came, the air in their house felt different, emptier, cleaner, but also colder. Greta stood in the kitchen, staring at the same mug she'd used every morning since she moved in. The coffee had gone cold, untouched. She didn't know what to do with her hands anymore. Matthew was upstairs, silent. The house had turned into a museum of everything they'd built together, and now she was the unwanted guest still wandering its halls. For Greta, the first feeling wasn't freedom, it was nausea. The weight of finally saying the words hit her like a crash after holding your breath too long. She'd rehearsed that conversation 1,000 times, but she never imagined how quiet it would feel afterward. No screaming, no fight, no begging. Just silence and guilt filling every corner. She'd wanted relief, but relief has a cruel edge when it's carved out of someone else's pain. Matthew didn't come downstairs for hours. When he did, his face was blank, drained. He wasn't angry, he wasn't even crying. That scared her most. He moved around the kitchen like a man following muscle memory, made tea, sat at the table, stared out the window. The absence of emotion was worse than any explosion. She wanted him to yell, to say something cruel, to give her permission to leave without hating herself. But he didn't. He just existed in quiet disbelief. He couldn't process it. His brain kept looping through fragments. Her voice saying the words, her shaking hands, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes. The shock hadn't worn off. He still half expected her to take it back, to say she was confused, to reach for him again. Denial is love's last defense, and he clung to it for as long as he could. Meanwhile, Greta packed small things first: makeup, toiletries, the book she never finished. Not because she planned to leave that day, but because staying was unbearable. Every photo on the wall mocked her. Each one captured a version of herself she didn't recognize. She kept thinking about how much easier this would have been if he'd been a bad person. If there had been a villain, a betrayal, a clean reason. But there wasn't. Just two people who stopped fitting. When news of the breakup spread, fans reacted exactly how you'd expect. The comment sections filled overnight. Half the viewers sided with Matthew, painting him as the heartbroken saint who gave everything. The other half defended Greta, calling her brave for choosing honesty over comfort. The internet turned their pain into content. Clips of the dinner scene were shared with captions like, "This is what emotional honesty looks like," or "She waited too long." Everyone wanted to assign meaning, to turn heartbreak into a moral lesson. That's what happens when reality TV love stories end. The audience becomes judge and jury. People forget there are no heroes in endings like this, only humans trying not to drown. Greta read a few of the comments before deleting her social apps. The praise didn't comfort her, the hate didn't surprise her. What haunted her was how little anyone seemed to understand what it costs to stop pretending. Matthew, on the other hand, stayed offline. Friends reached out, coworkers texted, but he ignored most of it. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted normalcy, something solid to hold on to. He threw himself into routine, running, cleaning, going to work early, staying late. It helped him feel like time was moving, even if he wasn't. But at night, the stillness crept back in. Every room echoed differently without her presence. Every object reminded him of something she'd chosen, some piece of their shared life now stripped of meaning. There's a cruel irony in breakups like theirs. Greta felt guilty for being the one who left, and Matthew felt punished for being the one who stayed too long. Both were victims of their own honesty arriving too late. She'd been lying to protect him. He'd been loving to save her. And in the end, both destroyed the thing they were trying to preserve. Friends tried to comfort them with cliches about growth and healing, but neither found peace in that. Healing doesn't feel noble when the wound is self-inflicted. Greta kept replaying his words, "You should have given me the truth, not pity." That line lived rent-free in her mind. She knew he was right. Every time she delayed the truth, she took another piece of his dignity without meaning to. But here's where it gets complicated. Honesty doesn't always feel good, and kindness doesn't always mean silence. Sometimes breaking someone's heart is the only way to stop breaking your own. Greta's decision wasn't cruel, it was overdue. And Matthew's forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was love refusing to turn bitter. The tragedy was how late both came to understand it. When the show's tell-all aired months later, both of them appeared separately. Matthew spoke softly, measured, composed. He said he didn't regret loving her, only waiting too long to accept reality. Greta's segment was shorter. She said she hoped he'd find someone who gave him everything she couldn't. No tears, no drama, just a calm that comes after too much chaos. That calm divided the audience again. Some called her emotionless, others saw it as peace. But what most people missed is that real closure doesn't look cinematic. It's quiet, mundane, and often invisible. Greta's peace came with shame. Matthew's acceptance came with emptiness. Both carried scars, they just wore them differently. Their story isn't rare. Anyone who's watched enough TLC knows this pattern. Couples cling to a dream version of love, convinced that sacrifice equals loyalty and silence equals strength. They confuse endurance for happiness until one person finally breaks. And when that break comes, it looks like betrayal to everyone else, but to the one who left, it's survival. Because the truth about relationships like this is simple but brutal. Love can be real and still run out. Kindness can coexist with heartbreak. and pretending to be fine only delays the pain you'll both have to face later. The fans moved on eventually. New seasons, new scandals, new couples to analyze. But for Greta and Matthew, this was more than another storyline. It was the quiet proof that not all breakups come from chaos. Some come from the exhaustion of trying to stay good for too long. And as their episode faded into the archives, another 90-day couple started showing the same cracks. The same forced smiles, the same rehearsed affection, the same long pauses that hide the truth. Which begs the question, how many more couples are still performing a love story that's already over? The days that followed were quiet in a way neither of them expected. No screaming, no pleading, no attempt at reconciliation. Just two people walking through the same rooms with different hearts. The tension that once filled their home was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt almost holy. It was the silence that comes after a storm, the kind where you finally understand there's nothing left to fix. Greta stayed for a few more days, packing slowly, folding clothes carefully, as if neatness could soften the ending. Matthew kept his distance but didn't avoid her. They spoke in short, polite sentences. "Did you eat? I'll be out for a bit." It was surreal how civil it all felt. Like two diplomats finalizing peace after a long, invisible war. Neither of them wanted to inflict more pain. They'd already done enough of that without meaning to. One evening, as she zipped her last suitcase, Matthew stood at the doorway. "So this is it," he said, voice steady but small. She nodded. There were no more explanations left to give. He took a slow breath and asked, "Was it ever real?" Greta turned, eyes glassy but calm. "It was, it just stopped being enough." That sentence lingered, because in it was the whole truth of their story, love that was real but not sustainable. You can love someone deeply and still not fit. You can share a life, a home, a bed and still feel alone. That doesn't make it fake, it makes it human. After she left, Matthew didn't chase her. He didn't post cryptic stories or try to rewrite the narrative. He just let the silence speak. For a while, that was the hardest part. The house still smelled like her perfume, the fridge still had her favorite snacks, her jacket still hung on the back of the chair. But slowly, the small details stopped hurting and started fading. He realized something important in those weeks. Love had made him forget himself. He had been so focused on being a good partner that he'd lost the ability to ask for what he needed. Every compromise, every sacrifice, every silent nod had been a way to keep peace. But peace without truth isn't love, it's surrender. Greta, meanwhile, began the slow process of forgiving herself. She didn't regret being honest, but she hated how long it had taken her. She'd convinced herself that lying was kindness, that if she smiled a little longer, it would hurt less when she finally said the words. But kindness built on dishonesty is still cruelty, no matter how softly it's delivered. She thought about Matthew often, not with longing, but with respect. He had loved her in the purest way possible, completely, without ego. And she'd loved him once too. That's what made it tragic. The love had been real, the timing had not. It's easy to villainize someone in a breakup, especially when it's public, but their story isn't about heroes or victims. It's about how two good people can still break each other simply by refusing to face what's already true. In a way, their ending was merciful. They didn't destroy each other. They just finally told the truth. The tell-all episode later showed them sitting in separate chairs, answering questions with quiet dignity. Greta said she hoped Matthew found happiness. Matthew said he wished her peace. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was two people closing a chapter that had already written itself. Fans wanted more emotion, more confrontation, more chaos, but sometimes real closure is boring. Sometimes it's quiet. That's the irony of modern relationships. We're trained to believe love should always be loud, grand gestures, big sacrifices, dramatic reconciliations. But most endings don't explode, they dissolve, they vanish in everyday moments. In silence, in politeness, in the routine that becomes a prison. And by the time you realize it's been over for months. So what does love mean when comfort replaces connection? When loyalty becomes habit, and affection becomes performance? Maybe it means you've outgrown the version of yourself that fell in love. Maybe it means you're choosing honesty over longevity. Or maybe it just means you finally understand that love without growth isn't stability, it's decay. That's what Greta and Matthew's story shows us. It's not a tale of betrayal or failure. It's a mirror for every couple who's ever looked fine from the outside, but felt hollow inside. It's a warning about the danger of mistaking peace for fulfillment, and a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away before resentment takes root. Love shouldn't feel like an obligation. It shouldn't require you to shrink to fit someone else's dream. It should make you feel alive, even when it's hard. And when it stops doing that, holding on isn't loyalty, it's fear. As months passed, both moved on quietly. Greta started a new job, stayed close with friends, learned how to enjoy being alone again. Matthew traveled, reconnected with family, began therapy. They didn't cross paths again, but they didn't need to. Some goodbyes are meant to stay permanent. And yet, their story continues to echo. Viewers still debate who was right, who was wrong, who changed first. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the point isn't who broke it, it's why so many people recognized themselves in it. Because their relationship wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a pattern we've seen over and over in this franchise. Couples who fall fast, build dreams on intensity, then confuse survival for happiness. You can spot it every season. The same smiles, the same half-hearted reassurances, the same hopeful captions under filtered photos. Love stories that look bright until the silence between them gets too loud to ignore. And while Greta and Matthew's breakup ended in tears and quiet dignity, another couple is already walking that same path, step by step, pretending everything's fine. The difference is, their silence isn't gentle, it's explosive. Because somewhere else in the 90-day world, another relationship is cracking, and this time, the truth won't come out over dinner. It'll come out in public, in front of millions, with lies, receipts, and betrayal so brutal it makes Greta and Matthew's breakup look almost kind. That's where we go next. Another story of love, ego, and collapse, but darker, louder, and far less merciful.